a world of horror, there are many which are well known, and others which are overlooked.
And these are my selection of the 10, which I think you should check out. Now, this is probably the first of a couple of top 10 countdowns in this style, maybe even this specific subject, which I will feature more than once. So if there is a movie or movies which I have reviewed, or maybe that I haven't reviewed yet, that you believe should be on a list like this, don't worry, it will probably feature on another part of this list down the line. In this initial countdown, though, I've picked out my personal 10 picks for 10 overlooked, undervalued, forgotten, you could say, horror movies, cult classics, B-movies, sci-fi in some cases, which are worth a look. They are the kind of movies which horror fans will 9 times out of 10 get some enjoyment out of, if not become one of your favourites. And some of the ones on this list are actually among my absolute favourite horror movies. So, let's get straight into it. First up then, we have a 2010 movie by the name of PROIE, and this is actually a French film, so if you're trying to Google it and search information for it, you'd be better off typing in PROIE 2010 film, because there are a couple of different films with similar titles, and if you just type in PROIE, you probably won't find it. But this movie is mean-spirited, it's bleak, it's aggressive, and it's perfect for that. It has that traditional foreign film edge, which you'd expect from something like a French or Korean horror, and it is in French. There are subtitles throughout, so if that puts you off, well, that's unfortunate, because it's a good movie. It's a movie which isn't necessarily going to crack most people's top 5, let's say, but it is certainly worth a look. It's a movie which is undervalued, by definition, that's why it's here, and it centres around a plot where a family in France is being terrorised by some local boars, and they go out to try and hunt them, and it doesn't exactly go as planned. So survival horror, creature feature, animal attack, kind of all rolled into one, but as usual, the humans are kind of just as bad, if not worse, so I would definitely recommend checking this one out. Next up we have a 2013 German horror movie by the name of Blood GLACIER. Now this movie is known under a couple of different titles, so you might have to try and do a couple of searches to find the correct one, but if you do find it, this movie has a lot of potential. It's far from being a movie which is carried out perfectly, or even a movie which is one of my most recommended, but it is at the very least worth a look. That is why it's a little bit lower on the list, but at the same time, this movie I think has a lot of heart. Its heart is also in the right place, and it pays some interesting homages to other creature feature and B-movie style creature movies, like The Thing, for instance, among others, and I love it for that. Is it flawed? Yes, for sure, and I talk about that more in my specific review of the movie, but overall, it's still worth a look. Next up we have what is probably the most campy movie on this list, a much more traditional idea of a schlocky cult classic B-movie sci-fi horror film, 1985's The Stuff. Kind of like The Blob, but lesser known. And it has many similarities to The Blob. It's more of an inanimate liquid type enemy with comedy and, as I said, that campy nature thrown in there as well. It's a lot more campy than The Blob from 58 or 88, but at the same time, if a movie knows that it's campy and goes with that and makes use of it, it can be very endearing. And that's exactly what The Stuff is. Good music, great comedy, great effects, practical effects, and it's just a cool idea. It suits its own story. It's not necessarily a film that will make everyone love it, but if you're like me, or just have that kind of taste in films, then you probably will like it at the very least, if not love it. If you do like The Blob, definitely check this one out. Next up on the list we have probably the best known movie of this entire countdown, but still an undervalued one for sure. 2014's Clown, also known as Eli Roth's Clown, although he didn't actually direct the movie. The director was actually the same guy who directed Spider-Man Homecoming, which is kind of a surprise, but still. This movie is similar in some ways to Stephen King's It, but the differences include being told from the clown's perspective, and also without any light humour. So, pure darkness, very gritty, very savage, and although there isn't constant jump scares or constant gore when it is done, it's pretty effective. The clown itself is a cool concept. It's actually a great rival for Pennywise in some weird ways, and it shares a lot of similarities to it, but with a decidedly more street-level, grounded feel, where the clown doesn't need to use trickery, he's just a straight-up monster. Next up we have a movie which is definitely undervalued. It didn't do amazingly well at the box office, and it was even partially crowd-funded, and I would recommend it to any fan, such as myself, of John Carpenter's The Thing, because this movie is very literally a direct love letter to movies like Alien and The Thing. Harbinger Down from 2015, sometimes also known as Inanimate, personally I prefer Harbinger Down, is basically what you'd get if you put The Thing on a boat. Very literally so. Practical effects, interesting casting, and although the production values aren't quite as high as something like The Thing, and it's not necessarily quite as good a movie, which I'll fully admit, it is still a lot of fun, and in order to appreciate what this movie is going for, you do definitely need to be a fan of movies like The Thing. If you do like those, then you will immediately understand what this movie is going for, what it's paying homage to, and the team behind the movie, Tom Woodruff, Alec Gillis, Studio ADI in general, are actually the same guys who worked on the effects which were snubbed, unfortunately, for 2011's prequel to The Thing. Those same guys made this movie, and as I said, it was partially crowdfunded, so it's a very interesting project, and I would say a very well executed one. Next up we have a movie which puzzles me, not in terms of the movie itself, but in terms of many people's reactions to it, because if you Google this film, 2011's Apollo 18, many of the scores which come up on Google are woefully low, even in the 24% region on sites such as Rotten Tomatoes, which of course aren't the be-all and end-all, but still, why are they so low? I don't understand, because this movie is no way near a 24%. I would put this movie as my favourite found footage horror film, and that's not even to be gimmicky. I genuinely feel that way. I love Cloverfield, I love Troll Hunter, I love a number of others, but this one, it's more justified than all of the others as far as I'm concerned for actually making use of found footage, because the essential concept justifies it. It's an Apollo mission to the moon with only 2 guys there, and it's all being recorded in very grainy, low quality, I believe almost black and white, if not black and white footage, and it's got such a great atmosphere. This is a genuinely unnervingly creepy film with great effects, and I love it. I love everything about this film, the lack of music, the fantastic performances, the great effects. It's a genuinely creepy found footage horror, but in more of a sci-fi vein. And it's one which I do not understand why people give it such low scores. Definitely check this one out. In number 4 we have a movie which is kind of controversial, but not really in a controversial way. It's more a movie which is fun to hate, as far as a lot of people seem to go. It's one of my favourite horror films though, 2010's Rubber. The essential concept is about as ridiculous as the stuff, because this is a killer tire movie, and as the movie itself says as the tagline, it's the best killer tire movie you'll ever see. And it justifies that. This is a movie which I would say should not be called stupid or dumb, because it's not trying to be serious. This isn't an attack of the killer tomatoes or anything like that. It's a movie which knows what it is, and it's trying to be weird. That's the whole point. It's very funny, it's got great cinematography, an excellent soundtrack, some of the songs I actually have on my phone and just listen to in general, and it's a movie which is definitely way out there. And I would say that as a general rule, if you're second guessing the first 5 minutes of this movie, you probably won't enjoy any of it. If you have a smile on your face as soon as the movie starts, which I did, then you'll love the ride. I hope that you do, because as far as horror movies go, this is kind of like a mix of Willy Wonka and Alice in Wonderland with a killer tire. So if that sounds like it appeals to you, check it out. It's pretty weird. Moving up now into my top 3 picks, for this list at least, of undervalued horror movies which you really do need to see if you are a horror fan. We start off with a movie which I've championed for a long time, 2008's Splinter. This movie is great. It's one of the best monster movies of recent years, And to put it simply, it's kind of like a combination of the Blob and the Thing in a gas station. There are very few people in the film, the camera work is great, the music is cool, and I love everything about it. It did woefully bad at the box office, but it's a great movie. This movie is certainly worth a watch. If you are even remotely into the concept of monster horror movies, watch this movie. And it's one of the very few monster creatures which may just be able to beat John Carpenter's The Thing in a one-on-one fight. And that is saying a lot. Moving up now into number 2, we have a movie which tons of people have never seen, and most people probably haven't even heard of. A 2005 direct-to-DVD Irish horror film, distributed by Film 4 and Lionsgate Films. This movie is simply one of my favourite horror films. Imagine, once again, I reference it a lot because as far as I'm concerned, it's the gold standard of monster films. Imagine something like John Carpenter's The Thing, or even more specifically, Alien, on a dairy farm. Now that sounds dumb, it sounds ridiculous, it sounds campy, but all of those words have nothing to do with this movie. Essie Davis is in this film, known of course from The Babadook, and just like The Babadook, this film has a wonderful sense of bleak dread. The colours are washed out, the music is fantastic, the opening animations for the credits draw you in straight away, 28 Days Later style. It's a great horror film. It's so much better than it has any right to be, and it's one of my absolute favourites for good reason. The only part of the film, without spoiling anything, which kind of lets it down, is some of the effects toward the end. But at the same time, many of the effects in the film are actually very unnerving, and there's something about the whole concept around farming and the birth of creatures and something being not quite right there that's just inherently unnerving. And I think it's a great film. Definitely see if you can find this one, and if you are able to find it, pick it up, for sure. And finally, in number 1, a movie which I fell in love with as soon as I saw it, but at the same time, pretty much no one's talking about, and even those who have seen it have a 50-50 chance of either really liking it or just not getting it at all and absolutely hating it, because that's what some reviewers do. 2014's Black Mountainside. This is a Canadian horror film, and the best way I would say to describe this movie is imagine if you took the location and the casting of John Carpenter's The Thing, and then combine that with the creature style and the atmosphere of The Babadook, and put those together. So an isolated, cold location with a science-based male cast, mostly of older guys, but then with a creature that doesn't just attack you, it attacks your mind. The movie does a lot of things which I love. There's great camera work, believable performances across the board, not everyone, but most of them by far, and even a total lack of a soundtrack, which is perfect for this movie. This movie is sinister, it's unnerving, it's bleak, and as far as I'm concerned, it's about as perfect a horror film as I've seen in a long time. I adore this movie. I recommend it above almost all others in the genre. It's my second favourite horror movie of all time. And I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but I don't even need to assess that. I know that it is. Second only to John Carpenter's The Thing, with The Babadook just behind it. So it's perfectly nestled in there for me. Definitely check it out, and above all others on this list, I would definitely recommend checking out number 1 and 2, of course, the most. That's why they're in number 2. Black Mountainside and Isolation are absolutely superb, and Splinter, of course, is starting to get more of a reputation, but is also an excellent monster film. But all 10 of these are definitely worth checking out, and as I said, I will cover more parts in this series down the line as well. And incidentally, if you would like to hear more in-depth breakdowns along with scoring of these movies, I've actually covered all 10 of these here on the channel as well. So if you want to see those individually talked about more and going more in-depth into why they're so good, then you can check that out down in the description below. But that's it for this list. Of course, I'll see you guys next time. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.